is simple. Are you not being hypocritical, Mr. Gao? Why I'm asking, you're saying that, okay, in Africa, you are allowing some buildings, some infrastructure to be there. I'm from Zimbabwe. We have the second largest lithium reserves, but we're at the brink of losing ownership of all of these lithium reserves just because China built a parliament.
Wouldn't you say China's presence all over Africa is in a way an exercise of some sorts of power, a soft power of sorts, and does that not contradict with the foreign policy of China?
有人当面质问高志凯教授，你们在非洲修铁路建机场是不是一种新殖民主义？大家好，我是江湖。一个国家到底靠什么改变自己的命运？是制度，是资源，还是一套别人眼中的成功经验？一场国际论坛上的对话给出了一个很有意思的答案。面对关于中国发展、非洲合作、国际秩序的问题，高教授的回应引发了不少讨论。但是真正值得我们关注的不是谁说服了谁，而是这些问题背后一个国家发展的底层逻辑。接下来我们先听一下高教授的对话，听完之后我们再来拆解这场对话。
Hear from our speakers. Victor, I'm going to start with you. What does China get right in terms of core principles that the rest of the world can learn from China?
Thank you very much, Fima. It's a great honor for me to be here, and greetings to the distinguished audience as well as the other panelists, and equally, if not more importantly, to the distinguished students on the stage. First of all, I think the world we are living in is a multipolar world. If anyone says they want to go back to the unipolar world, it's a mission impossible. For the past 46 years, China has been building socialism with Chinese characteristics. I would say the more important thing are the characteristics. So what are these characteristics? This is really a million-dollar question. I would say for the past 4 decades or so, China has been put a premium on development. Deng Xiaoping said, development is the hard truth. We believe every country needs to develop, and no country should be complacent. No country should rest on its own laurel or even try to throw a wedge in other countries' development. So stability is very much of an asset, and keeping peace in the world is very much important, and also pushing for free trade and market practice of all kinds should be very important. When we look around the world, China always emphasizes the importance of connectivity, infrastructure. Why? Because we benefited from this. In China, we have a saying, if you want to be rich, build a road. That's why China builds, whereas several other countries are not in the building mode. They probably want to destroy. So I think the choice is very clear. Let's really put a focus on development, stability, peace, and always believe in development as the hard truth and the soft truth and the smart truth. Thank you.
So, Victor, you gave us some insight into the China model. From the way you described how China sees itself and the rest of the world, what ideas could we, or do you think China could export globally?
Well, I don't think China has the truth. Truth is always relative. Some truth works for you, but it may not work for others. I think from the Chinese perspective, several things really are very important. One is that without democracy, there will be no modernization. So China does not oppose democracy. China advocates democracy. But then on the other hand, democracy has no set model. You need to adapt the democracy to your own national circumstances and come up with your own unique system. Now, secondly, we hear a lot about human rights. Human rights are so important, but I think from the Chinese perspective, human rights do not exist in a vacuum. Human rights need to be balanced with human obligations. You cannot talk about human rights without equally talking about human obligations. Therefore, I think the Chinese perspective is more balanced, is more all-inclusive, rather than one-sided. For example, in this August hall, I cannot cry fire. That's not an exercise of my freedom of speech. It's actually a violation of law if my cry results in stampede, for example. Therefore, I think when we talk about all these things, we need to be very careful as to what these labels really mean. Very quickly, the United Kingdom for many hundred years didn't have a Supreme Court. The EU, during its periodic review, found that deficiency. and EU ordered the United Kingdom to set up the Supreme Court. That's why if you go to London, go to the Westminster Square, on the west side of the square, there is a Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. Why? Because United Kingdom built the empire, declined from the empire without a Supreme Court, while Britain had always talked about the balance of power. We need to really know what all these labels are really about and whether you are really delivering and walking the walk while you talk the talk. I think we all need to find a way to serve the fundamental interest of our own people rather than being lectured upon by others and having other values being imposed on our own country. Thank you.
Right, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rod. I'm a fourth-year student at Georgetown, and I want to really expand the discussion further. So, Mr. Gao, you talked a lot about development and how that's a priority for the Chinese government. However, we should move a bit further than just development. What makes successful societies is not just development, but it's merit. The idea that someone can get ahead because they're qualified and they're really good at what they do, and not because of their family or their religion or their tribe. And I believe that the most successful societies, which have been, for example, the United States, have succeeded in comparison to other countries because of that system. Because of the United States, you can get further ahead than if you were in other countries because of your merit. And I just want to really ask you that in China, there's also a big culture on merit. However, it's very top-down, and there's a lot of authoritarianism in China. And in many ways, the meritocracy of the past 30 years seems to be collapsing. The Chinese economy has not developed as much as it should have since post-COVID. So how can you really address those things while ignoring the rights of the individual as is taken in the West, for example?
Thank you very much. I think you are raising a very important question. Without going too much into history, I think China started to decline as a result of the First Opium War, intensified by the Second Opium War and the 1900 incident in China involving 8 countries kind of sending troops to China. And for the last 100 years or so, China experimented with all kinds of models of development. Empire, constitutional monarchy, republic, warlords, for example, revolution of all kinds. Eventually, I think China figured out a way that China need to go onto its own path. And then before 1978, when Deng Xiaoping bounced back to become the paramount leader, China was engaged in probably the most intensive splitting of the ideological hair. China was locked up in a big box, believing that socialism must be good, must be better than capitalism. But then Deng Xiaoping realized that socialism, that practiced by China, did not bring bread and butter to the table. People were hungry, poverty. By 1978, China probably achieved the highest level of egalitarianism in human history. Everyone was equal, but everyone was equally poor. Let me tell this distinguished audience, there is no fun of being locked up in poverty. And China's mission was to find a way to maintain its political system, which is unique, because Chinese history is unique, but also figure out a way to bring bread and butter to the table, to make sure that China will achieve development. That is why China's roadmap is clear. It's different from anyone else. Whatever China has been doing over the past 46 years may not be able to be done by any other country. But the key commonality is simple. That is, bring your people, uplift your people out of poverty, build roads, set up factories, push the edge of science and technology, and be a leading force for peace and stability. I think in this overall context, individuals will always be important. China could not have achieved all this miraculous transformation of itself if China did not empower the people, enable the people. But the way the Chinese people have been empowered and enabled are different. We always talk about the collectiveness of the Chinese nation together with the individual rights of each person. We always put a premium on family. In China, family is always important. And we refuse to be dictated by other countries when they want to redefine gender, when they want to redefine family. No, we believe the Chinese values are deeply rooted,
Victor,
dating back 5,000 years. We cannot be dictated by other countries.
Afamia.
I would like to challenge Mr. Gao with this question. So you've mentioned that China has a no interference policy with other states, and that states should have their own ability to dictate their way of life or their existence. But Wouldn't you say China's presence all over Africa is in a way an exercise of some sorts of power, a soft power of sorts, and does that not contradict with the foreign policy of China?
Allow me to mention one thing. Before China's extensive engagement with Africa, Africa itself is a forgotten continent. That's not what Victor Gao said. That's generally being said by Western countries. Africa, after decolonization, was more or less the forgotten continent. Western countries did not want to engage it for whatever reason. China went in. China treated every African country as brother and sister, and China really invested hugely in Africa. Now, many other countries are talking about engaging with Africa, including the United States, many European countries, India, for example. The more the better, because Africa should not be a monopoly for any other country, not for China, not for anyone else. Africa is for the African people. And the taste of the pudding is always, you should not be a judge yourself. You go to African country and ask them whether they like building a road, whether they like building a gymnasium, etc. That is the only truth, because don't be lectured by other countries about what value African countries should have. The African value will be different from many other continents, for example. The other countries in other continents will need to help the African country to build up their infrastructure, to build their manufacturing capabilities. And that is the only goal for China. China has no colonial objective for African countries. China is so far away physically from Africa. Whatever China is doing the same in ASEAN countries, in Latin American countries, for example. And this is a sign of China's philosophy. That is, if we build our pillars of transformation, we want to share that with you. If we believe building road is the only way out, we help you to build the road.
Carl.
Thank you. My name is Carl Jumbo, freshman student at Georgetown University. My question is simple. Are you not being hypocritical, Mr. Gao? Why I'm asking, you're saying that, okay, in Africa, you are allowing some buildings, some infrastructure to be there. I'm from Zimbabwe. We have the second largest lithium reserves, but we're at the brink of losing ownership of all of these lithium reserves just because China built a parliament for my country. So if you're saying that you are promoting the sovereignty of nations, of countries, but you're taking our own parliament away, and let's say the airport in Kenya, for example, are you not being hypocritical?
Let me be very blunt. Zimbabwe is a great country. You had your election several years ago, and the presidential candidate was very much against China. He's elected as the president, and once he's in his office, he changed his mind, because he knows for sure that for Zimbabwe development, China is the main contributor for the Zimbabwean economic development. If you do not agree with me, go back to your country, talk to your government, and check out over the past 30 years, which country has invested most heavily in your great country. I know Zimbabwe well. China has dealt with Zimbabwe governments for several decades, including your great presidents, for example. And I would say China-Zimbabwe economic cooperation has helped the economic transformation in Zimbabwe, in building up infrastructure facilities and in building up manufacturing capabilities of your country. That is the truth, if I may tell you. I think that is the only truth. Development is the hard truth. Thank you, brother.
I wanted to go to Mr. Gao one more time. So you said that we're not supposed to be lecturing others and we're supposed to go with our own identity because the truth is subjective from one country to another, right? But at the very least, we talked about the weaponization of human rights. But there are very basic fundamentals when we're talking about human rights, and it has been addressed multiple times. How are you addressing the one-state nation that you are talking about, which is something that was created by us and systems, in comparison to religions and traditions which were by higher-ups that were not created by us? How are you giving importance to one-state nations compared to that?
Thank you very much. When we talk about human rights in the world of today, I think the most important human rights are to protect the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. No country has any excuse to deny the Palestinian people their right of existence, their right to their own country, their right to their own culture. And if anyone comes to you and say, I'm a friend of your country, I'm a friend of Islam, of Muslim countries, etc., but I do not respect the Palestinian people's rights, he's a false friend. That's number one. Now, separately, you quoted J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is my classmate at Yale Law School. I was class of 1993. He was class of 2013. the quote he said is completely agreeable with me. China builds, America should build too. The United States should not just lecture others as if they have the totality of the truth. I think the United States is in a transformative age. It's launching a revolution against itself. This should be something very educational for all of us. I personally hope the United States will become great again 4 years from now. But where is the verdict? The verdict is still out there. We still need to urge our American friends to really work. And development is the hard truth. It applies to China for the past 46 years. It will apply to the United States in the coming 4 years. Thank you.
I want to ask you, Victor, and it's like a 30-second response, really, is from being inside of BRICS as China, does it feel like it's a different kind of world global order?
First of all, BRICS is a megatrend. It's a reality. The size of the BRICS countries' economy combined is larger than G7. Now, secondly, when you have a country like Turkey, which wants to join BRICS, which is a NATO member state, that's very profound. I would say the moment Turkey becomes a formal member of BRICS, that's a major turning point in history. And personally, I'm not a fan of de-dollarization, but I'm completely opposed to weaponizing the dollar or weaponizing the SWIFT system, not only for China's sake, but for all the other countries' sake. We are in the Middle East. Lots of countries are very wealthy. Do you really want to expose yourself to this wanton seizure of your assets, for example, and denying you the SWIFT privilege or using your own dollar, for example? That decision will be made by the individual countries. And I would say BRICS, being a megatrend in the world, is not anti-West. No, it's not promoting de-dollarization, but it is having a mission that is to preserve its own national sovereignty and territorial integrity, making its own flexibility to use dollar or euro or its own currency to settle, and that decision should be made only by the countries themselves, rather than being dictated by any other country. When Donald Trump says, if BRICS want to promote your own collective currency, I want to slap 100% tariff on your countries. Someone need to tell very distinguished Donald Trump that don't weaponize in the dollar, because if you weaponize in the dollar, you...
We'll move on the note of the very distinguished Donald Trump. This is the part of the show that we call the Majlis.
好，欢迎回来，朋友们。其实这段对话挺有意思，它不是一份提前准备好的官方通稿，而是一场真正面对面的交流。有人在现场提问，而且问题问得非常的直接。面对这些问题，高教授也没有回避，而是给出了不少值得我们进一步思考的信息。很多时候，国际上的争论表面上是看在讨论制度、价值观或者国家之间的竞争，但是如果我们往深一点去看，其实最后都会回到一个最基本的问题：一个国家到底靠什么实现长期发展？是依靠一套固定不变的模式，还是根据自身的历史背景、资源条件和现实环境，找到一条适合自己的道路？高教授在这场公开交流中面对了好几个非常尖锐的问题。有学生直接问，中国在非洲的存在是不是一种新的殖民主义？是不是在获取非洲的资源？还有来自津巴韦布的学生提到，他们国家是否可能因为中国参与建设铁路等项目而影响本国对于矿产资源的掌控？这些问题没有太多的铺垫，基本都是直击核心。换做任何一个人在现场面对这样的提问，压力其实都不会小。而高教授没有回避，而是接住了这些问题。从他的回答中，我们可以看到一条比较清晰的逻辑线。接下来我想带大家一起拆解一下他到底表达了怎样的观点，以及这些观点背后的国际环境、利益逻辑和发展思路。先来看他对于非洲问题的回应，他有一句说的很有意思：非洲曾经是一个被遗忘的大陆。理解这句话需要放到一定的历史背景里去看。冷战结束之后，很长一段时间里，西方国家和非洲之间的关系其实比较复杂，你不能说完全不关注，因为国际形象和政治影响力摆在那里，偶尔会有一些援助项目、人道主义行动。但是如果说真正投入大量的资金去建设基础设施，比如修铁路、建港口、建设电力系统和工业项目，这类长期投资并不是很多国家愿意主动承担的。原因其实很现实，基础设施周期长、投入大，短期收益并不明显，并且还伴随着各种的风险。所以在很长一段时间里，很多非洲国家虽然参与了全球化，但是并没有充分分享到全球化带来的发展机会，同时也承受了一些全球经济带来的压力。那中国做了什么呢？ 中国进入了这些市场，当然了，这里需要客观的看待，中国参与海外投资肯定不是单纯意义上的慈善行为，任何国家走向海外背后都有自己的经济利益和战略考虑，这是国际关系中的基本规律，美国如此，欧洲如此，中国也一样。关键问题不在于一个国家有没有利益，而在于这种利益合作的方式是什么。利益交换和单方面掠夺其实是完全两个不同的概念，合作的核心是双方都能够获得一定的收益，而不是一方不断的拿走资源，另一方没有发展的机会。中国在非洲参与建设铁路、港口、医院、工业园区等项目，这些东西至少可以看得见、可以使用的基础设施。铁路建起来以后，农产品运输效率提高，港口完善以后，贸易通道更加的顺畅，基础设施改善以后，一个国家才更容易发展产业。因为经济发展的基础离不开交通、能源、物流这些最基础的条件。所以高教授说，不要把非洲看成任何一个国家的后花园，这句话背后的逻辑其实非常的清楚。非洲的发展应该由非洲人民自己决定，而不是由外部力量替他们定义未来。从这个角度去看，他强调的是发展选择权的问题。过去谁参与建设，未来谁拥有更多的影响力，这是国际竞争中的一个现实规律。接下来再看他反复强调的一个核心概念，发展是硬道理。这句话对于中国观众来说非常的熟悉，但是对于很多外国观众来说，它背后的含义可能并没有那么直接。为什么高教授会把发展放在所有问题的前面？因为在他的逻辑体系里面，一个国家无论讨论什么问题，最终都需要建立在一定的发展基础之上。他在讲话中提到了中国过去的发展经历，说在1978年之前，中国曾经经历过一种高度平均主义的时期。那个阶段的特点是，大家看起来都比较平等，但整体生活水平并不高。他用了一个非常直白的表达，所有人都一样，但所有人也同样贫穷。这句话为什么值得关注？因为它其实反映了一个国家发展中非常现实的矛盾。一个社会当然需要公平，但公平也需要建立在一定的财富创造能力之上。如果整个社会创造财富的能力不足，那么单纯追求平均，最终可能带来的结果不是共同富裕，而是共同缺少发展空间。所以中国在1978年之后进行了方向上的调整，把更多的精力放在了经济建设、产业发展和改善人民生活上。从某种角度来看，这是一种现实选择。当一个国家发现原来的发展方式难以解决现实问题时，寻找新的路径本身就是一种务实的调整。当然了，任何的发展过程都不是完美的，改革和变化一定会伴随着新的问题，也会面临新的挑战。但是不可否认的是，这个过程确实推动了大规模经济增长，也让大量人口摆脱了长期贫困的状态。这也是为什么发展成为高教授整个回答中的核心关键词。然后我们再来看他对于人权问题的回应，这部分内容其实非常值得展开去讨论。面对关于人权的问题，他没有简单陷入谁对谁错的争论，而是换了一个角度提出人权不能脱离责任而存在。他举了一个很生活化的例子，说在这个大厅里面，一个人不能随便的大喊着着火了，因为如果这种行为导致混乱，甚至是伤害到了别人，那就不是单纯的行使自由，而是在影响其他人的安全。这个例子想表达的核心是，任何权利都不能完全脱离社会环境而存在，自由和责任之间需要找到平衡。一个人的权利很重要，但与此同时也需要考虑自己的行为是否会影响其他人的利益。这个观念放在不同国家、不同文化背景下可能会产生不同的理解，但是从逻辑上来看，它反映的就是一个长期存在的问题，个人权利和社会整体利益之间如何找到一个平衡点。他进一步提出，不同国家对于人权、自由等概念的理解会受到历史、文化和社会结构的影响。其实这个问题也是国际关系中的一个长期讨论，因为世界上不同国家的发展阶段不同，历史经历不同，文化传统也不同，很难简单用一种标准去衡量所有的国家。但是这并不意味着不同的国家之间不能交流，也并不意味着所有的做法都不能讨论，而是说在观察一个国家的时候，需要理解它背后的历史背景和现实条件。国际社会真正需要的也许不是要求所有国家完全一样，而是在差异中寻找合作方式。接下来还有一个非常值得关注的话题，那就是关于金砖国家和国际金融体系的讨论。有人问到金砖国家是否代表一种新的金融秩序，以及是否能够推动去美元化。高教授在这个问题上的回答比较有意思，他首先表示他并不是简单支持所谓的去美元化。这个表态其实值得注意，因为外界经常会把相关的讨论简单理解成某个国家 家要挑战美元体系，但是它的重点并不是替代美元，而是反对把金融体系变成地缘竞争工具。它的逻辑大概是一种国际货币能够长期的存在，靠的是信誉和稳定，而不是单纯依靠规则优势。如果任何金融体系被过度用于政治目的，那么其他国家自然会考虑增加选择空间。其实从这个角度来看，全球经济体系正在发生变化。过去几十年，世界经济主要围绕几个核心的体系运行，但是随着一些新兴体系不断的发展，他们希望在国际规则制定中拥有更多的参与机会，这也是一种自然趋势。当然了，全球金融体系不会在短时间内发生彻底的变化，任何大型体系都有惯性，也需要经过长期的调整。未来更可能出现的是多种金融安排并存，而不是简单由一种体系取代另一种体系。最后呢，还有一个细节值得去注意一下。当被问到如何看待美国未来发展的时候，高教授表达了一种非常复杂的看法。他认为美国依然具有很强的能力，未来仍然存在重新发展的机会，但结果如何还取决于自身调整。这句话背后的意思其实是一个国家的发展并不是由过去的优势决定的，而是取决于能不能不断解决新的问题。无论哪个国家都需要面对内部的挑战，也需要适应外部环境的变化。一个国家如果能够持续的创新，提高产业能力，改善普通人的生活，那么它就拥有长期竞争力。反过来，如果发展停止，即使拥有过去的优势，也可能面临新的压力。回过头再来看高教授这段讲话，贯穿始终的一条主线其实很清楚，一个国家最终的竞争力来自于自身能力的建设，包括产业能力、科技能力、基础设施能力以及解决现实问题的能力。国际竞争说到底并不是简单比较谁的理念更先进，也不是一句口号就能够决定结果。长期来看，比拼的是谁能够持续创造价值，谁能够不断的提升自身的实力。这也是为什么很多国家无论选择什么发展道路，最终都不会绕开一个问题：如何让自己的人民生活得更好。对于普通人来说，国际格局可能距离很远，但是就业机会、生活水平、未来预期，这些才是真正能够感受到的变化。所以理解国际问题不能够只看到表面的争论，更重要的是要看到背后的发展逻辑，看不同国家为什么会做出不同的选择。任何观点都有自己的背景和局限，真正理性的思考不是简单接受一种说法，也不是完全否定另一种说法，而是去寻找不同观点背后的原因。国际关系从来不是一道简单的选择题，它更多的时候是不同国家在现实利益、历史经验和未来目标之间不断的寻找平衡的过程。也许这才是我们今天讨论这场对话最大的意义。好了，本期视频就聊到这里，以上内容仅供信息参考，不构成任何单一结论。如果你对这个话题也有自己的看法，欢迎在评论区一起交流一下，咱们理性讨论，多聊逻辑，少些情绪。当然了，也别忘了点赞订阅，这样每次我发布新的内容你都不会错过。我是江湖，我们下期再见。